There are many people who are fearful of the future. They look at the dramas and the pandemonium taking place in the world, and they want to know how they'll be able to stand. This study is an update of what is taking place in the world and how to prepare yourself for the final events in Earth's history.
La France est aujourd'hui devant un choc qui est celui d'un attentat, car c'est un attentat terroriste, ça ne fait pas de doute.
On Wednesday, the 7th of January 2015, two armed gunmen of Algerian descent shot dead 12 individuals in response to satirical pictures in a magazine of Muhammad, who Muslims call a prophet. The British newspaper, the Daily Mirror, used the Western colonial language of barbaric to describe the shooting. And another British newspaper, the Daily Telegraph, used the caption "War on Freedom," when Western governments have been warring against civilian freedoms since 9/11. This language was also used by British Prime Minister David Cameron, who, months before, wanted to clamp down on the same freedoms he now wants to uphold.
I know that this House and this country stands united with the French people in our opposition to all forms of terrorism, and we stand squarely for free speech and democracy. And these people will never be able to take us off those values. We must work together to take down illegal online material like the recent videos of ISIL murdering hostages. And we must stop the so-called non-violent extremists from inciting hatred and intolerance in our schools, our universities, and yes, even our prisons. Of course, some will argue that this is not compatible with free speech and intellectual inquiry.
But is Islam really this big threat against the freedoms of the West, or are governments deliberately distorting the facts?
Discussion. Mike, let me tell you a little bit about the research I've done so far. I went back and I looked into the Europol statistics, which is, of course, as you know, the European police agency that keeps track of security issues across the European Union. And this is what I found. In 2013, a total of 152 terrorist attacks in the EU. Muslims were responsible for a surprising 0%. In 2012, a total of 219 terrorist attacks in the EU. Muslims responsible for 2.7%. 2011, it goes on and on, where the sort of rate fluctuates 0.5% for 2011. It makes you wonder if the bulk of terrorist attacks is not being committed by Muslims in Europe. Is the fear of Muslims in Europe being exaggerated beyond its true proportion?
Professor Jeremy Keenan is one of those rare Western intellectuals who looks at world issues and the disinformation that is given to us. One of his articles was in the January 2013 edition of the New African magazine and shows that the terror threat is an exaggeration, but terrorist groups were financed and supported by the West. The global war on terror has been inserted into the Sahara-Sahel by the US in concert with Algerian intelligence operatives since 2002. The 9/11 terrorist attacks in the US precipitated a whole new era in US-Algerian relations. The Algerians wanted more terrorism to legitimize their need for more high-tech and up-to-date weaponry. The Bush administration, meanwhile, saw the development of such terrorism as providing the justification for launching a new Sahara front in the global war on terror. Such a second front would legitimize America's increased militarization of Africa so as better to secure the continent's natural resources, notably oil. This, in turn, was soon to lead to the creation in 2008 of a new US Combat Command for Africa, AFRICOM. The US government has a long history of using false flag incidents to justify military intervention. In his recent investigation of false flag operations, Nafeez Ahmed states that the US investigative journalist Seymour Hersh was told by a Pentagon advisor that the Algerian El Para operation was a pilot for the new Pentagon covert P2OG program. In May 2008, President George W. Bush requested some $400 million in covert funding for terrorist groups across much of the Middle East Afghanistan region in a covert offensive directed ultimately against the Iranian government. An initial outlay of $300 million was approved by Congress. Since the El Para operation, Algeria's DRS, the Algerian Intelligence Service, with the complicity of the US and the knowledge of other Western intelligence agencies, has used Al-Qaeda in the Islam Maghreb, though the almost complete infiltration of its leadership, to create a terrorist scenario. Much of the terrorist landscape that Algeria and its Western allies have painted in the Sahara-Sahel region is false. Professor Keenan is not the only one who sees in between the lines.
Because the textbooks which were used in the Quranic schools and the training manuals which were used to indoctrinate the Mujahideen in Pakistan and Afghanistan were printed in the United States and were produced by the University of Nebraska. We know that all those terrorist entities, whether it's the ISIL or Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, or the Libya Islamic Fighting Group, or Al-Shabaab in Somalia, or the various entities which have spread across sub-Saharan Africa, all of those Al-Qaeda affiliated entities are essentially intelligence assets. They are not agents of the US government, but they are manipulated and controlled and financed by the United States and its allies.
So the Western intelligence trains Islamic radicals, then Western governments mercilessly bombs and colonizes Islamic lands for its natural resources. They know full well that it will agitate Muslims and radicalize many, where they will attack and respond to these wars, and make us believe that we, in the West, are these innocent victims who need to be protected. Raise the so-called terror alert that gives the government more power, and they, the government, under one breath, say they want to uphold democracy and freedom of speech, while they are robbing it from you. For more and more of our lives is now on a digital database, where they can monitor everything you're doing, and the heads of the social network community want to get every single person online. And we, with our smartphones, also end up being spies ourselves. In the UK, the government's GCHQ is recruiting young techies to spy for them, while blaming the social network sites for fueling the recruitment drive of Islamic radicals and not cooperating with them, when British intelligence is spying on the entire world, as Britain's Channel 4 News has confirmed.
This is GCHQ's listening station in Bude, Cornwall. It's from here that British intelligence monitors the world's internet traffic.
GCHQ has probably the most invasive network intercept program anywhere in the world, and it's the world's first full take, they call it, and that means content in addition to metadata on everything.
In return for feeding traffic into here, Cable and Wireless was paid millions of pounds a year. The project was costing £1 million a month at one point. In July 2012, Vodafone bought Cable and Wireless for just over £1 billion. The unprecedented grab of personal data took place here, on the Cornish coast. This area has been critical to Britain's communications for more than a century, with telephone cables running from places like Porthcurno Beach west to our allies in the US and east to the Empire. But the area remains a vital landing point for fibre optic cables. A quarter of the world's internet traffic passes beneath Cornwall's sands. Cable & Wireless ran its data through a cable owned by an Indian company called Reliance Communications. The cable stretches from Asia through the Middle East and lands at Porthcurno. Reliance's transatlantic cable lands in Sennen Cove, 6 miles north, and the two cables come together here, Skewjack Farm. Documents show that in 2011, this allowed Britain's spies to access all traffic from Reliance's main cable and send it to the GCHQ base up the coast in Bude. Top secret documents from GCHQ show it was this access point, codenamed Nigella and run by Cable & Wireless, that allowed Britain's spies to gather the private communications of millions of internet users worldwide. With the help of the telecoms companies, GCHQ expanded the amount of data it could monitor by 7,000% in just 5 years. Its computers processed 46 billion events per day.
As we go through the crazy maze of life, if there's one thing which will steer us in the right direction, it is Bible prophecy. Bible prophecy is designed to guide God's people into eternity. And Jesus gives us one warning of what will be one of the biggest signs of the last days. In Matthew chapter 24, verses 4, 5, 11, and 24, one of the key signs of the last days is deception. But there's another sign, war. War is all around us. And I'm going to use the words of Michał Chossudovsky to give us an insight on how crazy war is going to get on this planet.
There has been much discussion and debate concerning the dangers of nuclear war. So that the world is at a very dangerous crossroads, because an evolution towards a nuclear confrontation will inevitably lead us into a World War III scenario, which ultimately threatens the future of humanity.
War is in our face all the time. And even if you find the news reports depressing and the imagery abhorrent of the suffering around the world, you still unconsciously consent to it without being aware of it by the glamorization of it through the celluloid art of edutainment. And the 21st century wars have led to more draconian laws being introduced in free democratic states, where groups have been singled out and have become targets. And if you want to see how true Bible-believing Christians will be dealt with in the not-too-distant future, let us look at Russia. In previous studies, it was shown that films like Salt, one of the most famous and influential ambassadors for the US military-industrial complex, Angelina Jolie, promotes war, not just through her films, but her UN warmongering agenda under the guise of humanitarianism. Tom Cruise, another promoter and endorser of US military interventions in his Mission Impossible 4 Ghost Protocol, another anti-Russian propaganda flick. Bruce Willis, another pro-war actor in his A Good Day to Die Hard, promotes the anti-Russian agenda. Denzel Washington in The Equalizer is fighting the Russian mafia in the US. And Keanu Reeves in his John Wick is at conflict with, guess who? A Russian gang. The video game Battlefield 4 promotes the same anti-Russian agenda.
Northern Russia. This is where the trail of breadcrumbs ends. Intel from the Chinese mainland has brought us to this frozen wasteland. Rumors of secret weapon and manufacturing facilities suggest that Russia is arming for the next evolution of warfare. We don't know what we're going to find up here, but it's clear that they are more than prepared to make their final stand.
But amidst an economic unstable world, with mysterious missing planes, one geopolitical system is trying to play the intelligent game as a global power broker, a peacemaker, where underneath the cloak, this wolf in sheep's clothing is the most deadliest of all warmongers. The seven-headed dragon, or serpent, was once the most revered creature in every pre-Christian culture that began in ancient Babylon. During the 30 Years' War, when the Protestants defeated the papacy, they depicted her as a seven-headed dragon, the prophetic description of her in Revelation chapter 12 verse 3, chapter 13 and verse 1, and 17 and verse 3. The papacy, the First Kingdom, has aligned herself with some of the most influential individuals of the planet that has let people put their guard down who were once hostile to her. But if you were to go inside St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City, you will see a statue of a soldier priest whose name was Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, whose aim was to conquer the whole world for the Catholic Church. The most famous Jesuit in the world, Pope Francis I, is spearheading Ignatius' agenda and cleverly subjugating the world and winning over their sympathy, especially in the field of diplomacy in countries like Cuba, where Newsweek magazine said Pope Francis' Cuba deal is the model for future diplomacy. Pope Francis has pulled off an impressive triumph in brokering the restoration of diplomatic relations between the United States and Cuba after a stalemate that conventional power politics had failed to solve for over 5 decades. Few realized it, but no international body was so well positioned to mediate as was the Catholic Church. When Obama visited the Vatican in March, Pope Francis kept bringing up Cuba. The deal is a model for the future, according to Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State in charge of the Holy See's foreign affairs, who played a key role in the Cuba talks. Parolin, a lifelong diplomat, and the Pope make a formidable duo. Watch out for more assertive and more subtle diplomacy on Latin America, China, the Middle East, and perhaps even northern Iraq. We will deal with Cardinal Pietro Parolin in the study on the French Revolution. But though, as the Bible said, all that dwell upon the earth shall wander after the papal beast, the late Avram Manhattan documented in detail how the Vatican will camouflage herself under the guise of a peacemaker to conceal her true global agenda in his timely 1967 book titled Catholic Power Today, where he said she will also use her numerical strength in different regions of the world to bring about powerful global decisions. He said, in 1962, the Second Vatican Council was convened to form an image of the Catholic Church more in tune with the times. Liturgical modifications, ecclesiastical reforms, novel interpretations of dogmas, and a new approach to seemingly intractable problems became the key to her miraculous resurgence. In the ideological field, her policy turned into one of cooperation with the Red Foe, that is Russia, and in the religious area, she advocated ecumenism, reunion, dialogues, and unity. Result? Friends and foes who only a while before had looked upon her with suspicious hostility now rallied to her side to carry out her grand master plan. The Catholic Church's offer for reunion to all Christian churches not in communion with her and of harmonious cooperation with the egalitarian-minded society of our age is a magnified ecclesiastical Trojan horse, a means to penetrate their citadels and accomplish their capture and final capitulation. The Trojan horse against Protestantism is reunion. Against contemporary world democracy, it is the unnatural Catholic advocacy of the theory and practice of liberty. The Catholic Church's numerical strength, intercontinental administration, global diplomatic network, political dominance, and intangible pressure are all being blatantly used to that end. Though many love to hear about the lateless movements in world affairs and the papacy and her role in world affairs, she has more of an influence over most of the churches without them being aware of it. Kurt Alexander Eichenwald is a US journalist and contributing editor with Vanity Fair and formerly the New York Times. He wrote an article in Newsweek magazine dated to the 9th of January 2015, criticizing the Bible and how Christians misuse it, especially US politicians. His challenges are not original at all, but some of his arguments are valid ones.
I'm not ashamed to admit that I'm a Christian, but you don't need to be in the pew every Sunday to know that there's something wrong in this country when gays can serve openly in the military, but our kids can't openly celebrate Christmas or pray in school. As president, I'll end Obama's war on religion, and I'll fight against liberal attacks on our religious heritage. Faith made America strong. It can make her strong again. I'm Rick Perry, and I approve this message.
Conservatives are now wondering whether we sing Hail to the Chief or we say Emperor. Well, there's some who are saying that the president is acting more like an emperor by sidestepping Congress and doing it on his own. Terry.
He documented that Rick Perry organized a massive prayer rally in Houston in a football stadium in 2011 with 30,000 Christians to make America a better place, and said, like prayers in schools, it contradicted the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus said you shouldn't do outward prayers of show and performance, but pray in secret with the doors shut. He said that Pat Robertson and other fundamentalists contradicted Romans chapter 13 verses 1 and 2 and sinned by condemning those in government authority. And US Governor Michelle Bachmann, while condemning same-sex marriage, should also keep quiet. And he gives the reason why, quoting the Bible. Well, according to the Bible, Bachmann should shut up and sit down. In the King James Version, it says women must dress modestly, can't embroider their hair, can't wear pearls or gold, and have to stay silent. Moreover, they can't hold any position of authority over men and aren't even allowed to be teachers, meaning if they truly believe the Bible is the inerrant word of God, women like Bachmann can't be in politics. Will Christians set up to the challenge? But there was an argument this journalist used that a number of years ago, some Nation of Islam used against myself and some colleagues that failed, for we don't partake in the arguments they used, but it will work with most Christians. I have visited the Basilica of St. John Lateran Church in Rome twice, the oldest Catholic church in the world. And as you walk in the foyer, there is a huge statue of Emperor Constantine. When many critics attack Christianity, they use Constantine as their weapon. In the Vatican, there is a huge painting of his so-called conversion at baptism, when Constantine didn't change one bit. In the British Museum, there is a coin of himself alongside the sun god. And this journalist, while giving a critique of the Bible and Christians picking and choosing what they want, makes a valid point. Constantine was a brutal sociopath who murdered his eldest son, decapitated his brother-in-law, and killed his wife by boiling her alive. And that was after he proclaimed that he had converted from worshipping the sun god to being a Christian. Constantine convened a meeting in the lakeside town of Nicaea. Things that are today accepted without much thought were adopted or reinforced at Nicaea. For example, the Old Testament was clear in declaring that God rested on the seventh day, making it the Sabbath. The seventh day of the week is Saturday, the day of Jewish worship and rest. Jesus himself invoked the holiness of the Jewish Sabbath. The word Sunday does not appear in the Bible either as the Sabbath or anything else. For years before Nicaea, though Constantine declared Sunday as a day of rest in honor of the sun god. At Nicaea, rules were adopted regarding the proper positions for prayer on Sundays, standing, not kneeling. Nothing was said of the Jewish Sabbath or Saturday. Many theologians and Christian historians believe that this was when, to satisfy Constantine and his commitment to his empire's many sun worshippers, that the Holy Sabbath was moved by one day, contradicting the clear words of what ultimately became the Bible. And while the Bible mentioned nothing about the day of Jesus' birth, the birth of the sun was celebrated on the 25th of December in Rome. While it is a matter of dispute today, Christian historians of the 12th century wrote that it was the pagan holiday that led to the designation of the date for Christmas. This is a challenge by Newsweek magazine. And as the prophetic clock winds down ever so rapidly, are you going to follow the Christianity of Christ and the apostles in the Bible, or the Constantine religion of the papacy, the First Kingdom, that promotes Sunday worship and Christmas worship? The Bible or tradition?
Are you now beginning to realize why I encourage you to study, to analyze, and to investigate? That challenge by Newsweek is just one of many. There's more to come. And if you looked at the study on Noah, you can clearly see that men just hate God. So I encourage you, please study, because the more you study, the more you'll humble yourself and you'll learn to serve others. There's a reason I like men like William Tyndale. Tyndale, in his book called The Obedience of a Christian Man, said, "To be great in the kingdom of heaven is to be a servant." George Washington Carver says, "Serving others is the Christ life after all." So when you serve Christ and you humble yourself, it will change your character. But there's another character that is going to be in conflict with the character of Christ.
The Holy Scriptures gives us a clear insight into our greatest foe. Revelation chapter 12 and verse 9 reads, "And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." He deceived the world into making them believe in self-worship, and the Bible uses nations that represent him. In a previous study, it showed Pope Francis I sitting on a white throne between two cherubims like God, and qualifying as the prophetic man of sin, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. But the papacy was not the first system to do this. In Lebanon is a sarcophagus that is dated to around 1000 BC, and on it is a carving of King Ahiram, the Phoenician ruler who in the Bible is labeled the Prince of Tyrus, Tyre being a city of Phoenicia. He also sits among cherubims like God's throne. This is how the Holy Scriptures describes him. It reads, "The word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, say unto the Prince of Tyrus, Thus saith the Lord God, because thine heart is lifted up, and thou hast said, I am a God, I sit in the seat of God in the midst of the seas. Yet thou art a man, and not God, though thou set thine heart as the heart of God." Then Satan, who the Prince of Tyrus represents, is introduced in the same chapter. "Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, take up a lamentation upon the king of Tyrus, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord God, Thou sealest up the sum, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created, till iniquity was found in thee. This is the mystery of iniquity. Thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty. Thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness. I will cast thee to the ground. I will lay thee before kings, that they may behold thee. When the Bible also describes Pharaoh, who wore the serpent mitre, the pharaohs also saw themselves as a god. And Ezekiel said, under inspiration, when describing this self-proclaimed demigod, "Speak and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, the great dragon," a description of Satan, "that lieth in the midst of his rivers, which hath said, My river is mine own, and I have made it for myself." In the British Museum, there are a number of tablets with Nebuchadnezzar's name inscribed on them, and Nebuchadnezzar has the same self-worship attitude as Pharaoh. And all this came upon the king Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months he walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. The king spake and said, Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? Self-worship over again. The Bible also uses the Babylonian system as a representation of Satan. I took this picture in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin in Germany of King Merodach Baladan, not Bin Laden, but Baladan, the son of Baladan, king of Babylon, mentioned in Isaiah chapter 39 and verse 1. When the Bible is describing Satan, it uses first the king of Babylon, and this is what it says. The burden of Babylon which Isaiah the son of Amos did see. And when was this burden? In the year that King Ahaz died was this burden. So this was written in around 712 BC. And it says, that thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon, and say, How hath the oppressor ceased? The golden city ceased. Thy pomp, self-worship, is brought down to the grave, and the noise of thy viols, a musical instrument. The worm is spread under thee, and the worms cover thee. Then Satan is introduced, but it records his name before his fall, the light bearer, Lucifer. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? Then we get to the origins of self-worship of Pharaoh, the prince of Tyre, and the kings of Babylon. For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Self-worship is the true embodied character of Satan. And when the Bible describes the spiritual condition of the last generation on planet Earth, like Satan, they are all just selfish, both inside of the church and outside of the church. This know also, that in the last days perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, fake, hypocritical, gossiping, backbiting Christians, but denying the power thereof. And the Bible says, from such turn away, or keep away from them. the root to all the evils and problems in this world is all down to selfishness. And Edward Alexander Sutherland, an absolutely brilliant educator, physician, and co-founder of Madison College in Madison, Tennessee, shows the root cause to tyranny and selfishness, the false forms of education. He said, Satan and his sympathizers were trying to reform the government of God. Here was born the rival system, supreme selfishness facing the utter self-forgetfulness of Christ, reason over against faith. Whether as Babylonish learning, Greek philosophy, Egyptian wisdom, the high glitter of papal pomp, or the more modest but no less workings of modern science, the results have been and always will be a savour of death unto death. Self-justification, self-exaltation, self-worship. Here was the human origin of the papacy, that power which opposeth and exalteth itself above all that is called God. Men's minds, clouded by self-worship, failed to recognize the voice from heaven. Today's generation is being indoctrinated into postmodernistic self-worship, and the most effective educational tool besides video games and films is the music video. A US singer called Trey Songz has a video titled Touching Love with graphic lyrical expletives. Like most of the cheap music videos today that is coming out, he is fantasizing in his dream about having all types of different women, well, so much to marriage, who are all scantily clad. 2 look like demons, but it is quite clear who is driving him to glorify Hugh Hefner's Playboy culture. The reptile in his hand, the serpent, that old dragon called the devil, who is also called Satan. He will be the driving force of this generation into self-worship and a rejection of God and His words, and their minds will be prepared and conditioned to accept that false form of worship, the mark of the beast.
The last struggle on this earth is going to be a life and death battle to the end. It is not going to be easy. I know Hollywood likes to distort things and say it's going to be over the Bible, and to a point, they're right.
I need that book. I know its power.
Nobody touches it but me.
Our only hope is in my hands.
I will repeat it over and over again, as I've done in previous studies. Please investigate everything. I want to be honest with you, that if you do make a conscious decision to accept Christ and take His word seriously, it is going to be a very lonely road. That's the path I've taken. And guess what? I have deep inner peace. Isaiah chapter 26 and verse 3 says, "Thou will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, because he trusteth in thee." Despite the madness going on in the world, God is going to see His people through. So I'm going to leave you some encouraging words.
In an exhaustive volume set of Christian theology, the 17th century Puritan scholar Thomas Goodwin gives us an insight of what will be the last results of the end times. He said that there is a world to come, which is of purpose and in a more special manner appointed for Jesus Christ to be king in, and wherein he shall more eminently reign. This kingdom of Christ shall break in pieces and consume all other kingdoms. Daniel chapter 2 verse 44. This will eat out all the monarchies and glory of the world. But to enjoy this Canaan, we must go through a wilderness to it.